Saudi Arabia is accused of forcibly detaining Lebanese leader Saad Hariri. Calls for his return have unified different political groups. But is Lebanon becoming an open battleground for a regional proxy power play? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. It's been a week since Lebanon's Prime Minister Saad Hariri suddenly resigned during a visit to Saudi Arabia. His actions have set off a chain of events that continue to play out across the region. The Iranian-backed Hezbollah movement, part of Hariri's governing coalition, says Saudi Arabia is holding him against his will. Hezbollah believes by forcing Hariri to resign, Saudi Arabia has declared war on Lebanon. The US has joined the UN in calling for stability in Lebanon, warning regional powers against using the country for proxy conflicts. We have a lot to get to with our guests, but first, this report from Zaina Hodder in Beirut.
Citizens of Saudi Arabia and its Gulf allies visiting or living in Lebanon are leaving. It's not the first time Gulf countries tell their citizens it is not safe to stay. Lebanon has long been entangled in the Saudi-Iranian power struggle across the region. But the latest warning heightens tensions after the resignation of Lebanon's Prime Minister, Saad Hariri. But alongside the tensions, there are growing signs of Lebanese unity in what many see as Saudi interference in their country. The resignation was sudden, raising concerns about the circumstances behind the decision. There is also concern about Hariri's freedom of movement. He may have been seen since he made the announcement in Riyadh, but the Prime Minister hasn't made any more statements. Lebanon's President Michel Aoun believes Hariri is under house arrest. He told Saudi Arabia's Chargé d'Affaires in Beirut, Walid Bukhari, that the circumstances of the resignation are unacceptable and Hariri should return immediately. Hariri's own political party made a similar demand. They didn't just suggest the Prime Minister is being held against his will, but expressed concern that Lebanon's Sunni community could be marginalized even further.
They are concerned and disenfranchised and disappointed by Hezbollah controlling their government and controlling their destiny. On the other hand, today they are concerned about their Hariri as a Sunni leader. So this is why yesterday they asked that Hariri return should be a priority.
Lebanon is a deeply divided country. There is a pro-Saudi camp led by Hariri, which has long accused Hezbollah of imposing Iran's agenda here. There is a pro-Iran camp led by Hezbollah, which has long resisted demands to disarm and to withdraw its troops fighting alongside the Syrian government. But even Hezbollah has added its voice to demands for Hariri to return, reiterating the belief that the Prime Minister is being held against his will.
We,
Hezbollah, and we, all the Lebanese, take this as an offence, and any offence to the Lebanese Prime Minister is an offence to all the Lebanese, even if he is our political adversary.
Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah was careful to avoid political escalation. Instead, he accused Saudi Arabia of wanting to impose a new leadership in Lebanon and start a war. He called on the Lebanese to avoid provocation and to stay away from the streets. The political divide hasn't gone away, but for now at least, politicians are putting it aside. There is a rare consensus for the need to unite at what many describe as dangerous times. Zaina Hodder, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Let's bring in our guests now, and joining us here in Doha, Beverley Milton-Edwards, visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Centre. In Beirut, Kamel Wazne, political analyst and founder of the Centre for the American Strategic Studies, and also in Beirut, Nour Samaha, a freelance journalist covering the Levant region. A warm welcome to all of you. First of all, Beverley, let's start by asking the big question here. What does Saudi want in Lebanon? Does it want a change of government? Does it want a proxy war with Iran? What's the aim?
Well, I think that's the multi-billion rial question that you're asking there. And I'm sure if any of us had the answer, we'd have a multi-billion rials in our pockets for our thanks. I think we're seeing a number of factors at work here, and we can't just really look at one issue in isolation of others. I mean, it's been clear for some time that Saudi Arabia has been involved in the politics of Lebanon, hoping to create a wedge, leverage Iranian influence out of the country, and in particular to undermine Hezbollah. And the extent to which it's been successful is questionable. The other is that this may be a case of the art of distraction. Given the domestic turbulence that has taken place in Saudi Arabia over the last 7 days, it may well be that this is one way in which both domestic and international audiences and regional audiences are distracted from the implications of the internal changes in Saudi Arabia.
That's a pretty risky game to play, though, isn't it?
Yes, and in fact, what I was going to add here is that we see perhaps the emergence of particular political personalities, including the Crown Prince, and also his Minister of Arab and Gulf Affairs, Minister Al-Sabhan. And what's very interesting there is that in terms of the long game, this strategy doesn't look like it started off well. If they had hoped to divide Lebanon and move those in the pro-Saudi camp closer, they've had the opposite effect. And what we see is perhaps that this might be initially, at least in the short term, somewhat reckless. And I think also it perhaps alerts us to the lack of understanding or the unwillingness by the young Crown Prince to know the region, understand its history, and how complex actions are within the region, particularly in relation to domino effects, whether they're played out in Lebanon or Yemen or Syria or Iraq or Libya. I mean, I could go on.
Kamel, would you agree with that analysis that Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, as he's known in the region, has perhaps underestimated what could be achieved, or overestimated rather, what could be achieved in Lebanon in terms of destabilizing it or indeed undermining Hezbollah?
It's obviously counterfire. It's the whole initiative that they took to destabilize Lebanon, all the threat that we heard in the past months, all the escalation, it turned against the Saudis because in Lebanon almost we have unifying position. We want our prime minister back. We want the security of the country. We want the country to be prosper and safe. The statements that coming from Saudi Arabia, it's aimed to destabilize the politics of Lebanon. It's actually, they want to destabilize the economy of Lebanon. They hasn't worked for the Saudi. It's actually counterproductive. And it's like somebody is shooting himself in the foot. This is speak of the use and experience that exists in Saudi Arabia and some of the muscles that they think they can actually put a lot of pressure on the Lebanese, and they think the Lebanese can cave in. The Lebanese are very smart, very aware of what is taking place. They understand the importance of Saudi Arabia, but they do understand the value and the sovereignty of Lebanon. Today, we're talking about the sovereignty of this country. We will not, in this country, allow any country to jeopardize the peace and security. And this is the position from the highest position, from the president of the country, who is steadfast, who
Kamel, if I could just jump in there. I'm just wondering if it's perhaps too soon to say that this strategy by the Saudis has not worked. After all, Hariri is still, by all accounts, in Riyadh. He has not returned to Lebanon to resign there formally.
Well, the issue is about the prime minister. The prime minister is very important for the country, but the stability of the country, the unifying of the country, this is really backfire because a lot of people thought this country is going to fall apart and then we're going to go begging to Saudi Arabia to not do this, because every day they say we can impose sanction against you, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to ruin the country. It's only one country. Lebanon is a sovereign country. Lebanon is a democratic society. We have connection with the rest of the world. We have connection with almost 190 countries. We have trade with all countries around the world. We have respect among a lot of countries around the world. We have people around the world. We have like 4 million people in Lebanon, but we have almost 15 million overseas. Nobody can bring the Lebanese will to this level. I think there's a lot of miscalculation on those part who came to power. They think they can push Lebanon. This is backfire. We have unifying position in the country. There is some in the country, they feel that they can capitalize on this, but even those are minority within the country. The position, he's a hostage. There's an international law that he has a immunity, and we want him back under this immunity.
Okay.
Any delay,
Nour, if I could bring you in for the moment.
To bring it to the
Kamel, if I could just bring Nour in, just to get an idea of what the reaction is in Lebanon. Did Lebanese remain steadfast against the Saudi move, as Kamel was just saying?
Absolutely, and I think that this is probably one of the biggest miscalculations on the Saudi part. I think what they were hoping to do by pushing for this resignation was ignite some sort of friction between the different political factions, which would then play out on the streets, which would allow them to take advantage of that instability to disrupt the government and the process that was happening within the political system. But what we've actually seen is no one has taken to the streets on behalf of Saudi, and in fact everyone has come together to, as Kamel said, to bring back the Prime Minister. Which I think, and also it's playing out in many different areas. I mean, it's interestingly enough, I mean, you're seeing it in nightclubs. People are chanting to bring back the Prime Minister. There's supposed to be a marathon that's being run in his name. Every political faction traditionally opposing each other are now coming together to demand the return of their Prime Minister.
Okay, let's just take a closer look at this point at Lebanon's complex political setup, beginning with the three roles that must have specific representation. We've got the president. He must be a Maronite Christian. Then there's the Prime Minister. He must be a Sunni Muslim. And the Speaker of Parliament, a Shia Muslim. The country is split between two political camps, a Saudi-backed alliance and a pro-Syrian Iranian coalition. Differences between the two sides have led to the collapse of governments in 2005, 2011 and 2013. Saad Hariri became Lebanon's most influential Sunni politician after his father, Rafiq Hariri, was assassinated in 2005. Last year, Parliament swore in a new cabinet dominated by Hezbollah and its allies. Hariri became Prime Minister after a Hezbollah-backed candidate, Michel Aoun, took the role of president. Now that brings us to today, where all factions have united to call for Hariri's return to Lebanon. Beverley, we're seeing this unity for now. I think we're all agreed that people in Lebanon, the political parties, have joined together. But how long can that last for? How quickly must Hariri come back before we start to see cracks forming, disintegration of this coalition government?
Well, that question is very pertinent. It takes us to the beginning of Lebanon's history to the present day, which is the answer to that question lies in the extent to which external actors apply pressures or interfere or fail to support the Lebanese call for the return of their Prime Minister, where if he returns and declares an official resignation as a result of some form of domestic consensus, then fair enough. So we've seen already that regional actors and in particular international actors coming from Washington and from the EU have this week been saying, please, external actors to Lebanon, do not interfere, do not undermine the stability of the country, do not endanger the security of the country, because they are not only concerned about Lebanon, but they're concerned about the fact that Lebanon is a neighbour to a number of countries where we see wider tensions in the region. I mean, in addition to the fact that our guests have pointed out that the Lebanese population itself, we must remember that Lebanon is a hosting nation to very vulnerable Syrian and Palestinian refugee communities. So the answer to that question perhaps lies not just within Lebanon, but also outside of Lebanon, and those actors that may seek to take advantage of this moment, positively or negatively.
But how unified is that voice from the outside? Because we've got the US, on the one hand, saying we support Lebanon. On the other hand, we've got Donald Trump visiting Saudi Arabia, seemingly to support the Saudi regime. France as well, on the one side supporting Lebanon, on the other side, President Macron visiting Saudi Arabia. So there's some mixed messages going on there.
Well, certainly from Western capitals, there are mixed messages. And yes, I mean, Trump did, I think he tweeted a week ago on the situation saying that he fully supported King Salman, that he fully supported the Crown Prince, and in everything that they do, ... that he had every confidence in this. I think by and large, people are less inclined to look to Trump as any kind of significant lever on these kinds of regional politics. And they're more inclined to look at, in particular, Tillerson and the State Department. And in particular, again, when we look at the European capitals, we look at Paris. Now, what I must point out, however, about the United States of America is that Washington is averse to involving itself in Lebanon. We just actually, when I was in Lebanon 2 weeks ago, the newspapers were marking the 34th anniversary of the Marines' bombing on the barracks there. And really, since that point, America has been averse and has paid a very high cost for its involvement in Lebanon. Paris, on the other hand, including President Macron, we see is invested in Lebanon's future. And I think it's worth noting that, in fact, he made a surprise visit to Riyadh on Friday or Thursday or Friday of this week, and that clearly he's attempting, or France is attempting, to find some useful face-saving solution to this problem.
Which brings me, Kamel, to the other regional player here, Iran, of course. They'll be watching the situation very closely. The former Prime Minister Hariri said he would cut off Iran's hand in Lebanon in his resignation statement. What do you think Tehran's next move is going to be?
Well, I think the statement that came from Saudi was read by the Prime Minister. We don't take it into account at this point because it seems that been read by a threat from the Saudis. So we know that he was receiving Iranian the delegate just a day or a few hours before he departed to Saudi Arabia. There is tension between the Prime Minister and Iran, between maybe the Prime Minister and Hezbollah. But basically now everybody today wanted the Prime Minister to come back to Lebanon. The Iranian, that's their position. They wanted the stability and the security of Lebanon. Hezbollah is basically wanted the same thing. We heard the head of Hezbollah was speaking very clearly about that position. He took very strong position about that. You have to remember, this government was created based on consensus, that people, they agree, they have some differences, but the interest of the country was put ahead of everything else. Today, where the Saudi, they probably resented this consensus that took place in Lebanon, and they decided they want to blow up this government. And that's basically what they did. They ambushed this government by inviting the Prime Minister and take him as a hostage. They have to remember, this is a country where there is a lot of challenges. Those people come around, and that's what we see today. I think my advice for the Saudis, this will backfire, and this is actually will make you lose a lot of influence in Lebanon in the short term and in the long term. Lebanon wanted a good relationship with everybody around the region, around the globe. They've been making a lot of miscalculation, not in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Qatar, with a lot of countries. They cannot count on Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is a nutcase. He
and
makes
anyway,
a lot
as
of
Beverley
mistakes.
was saying, the US is distancing itself from Lebanon. No, I just want to move the discussion on towards the situation again in Lebanon and the Sunni community, particularly how they are feeling now that they've lost their particular, temporarily, representation in government.
I mean, I think that there's, not just with the Sunni community, but I mean, across the board, there is concerns about what the next steps are going to be. There's concern within the, obviously there's a rallying around within the Sunni community that they need to stand behind their Sunni leader. And this is also being voiced by the other Sunni leaders in the country, which I think is reassuring for Lebanon as a whole, that you're not seeing that sort of division that you would have seen before. But I think much more, what the fears that are coming out right now across the board are what will happen in terms of economically to the country, what will happen in terms of security to the country. And this is something that won't just affect the Sunni community, but it's something that will affect the entire country. And I think this is where your other guests also sort of alluded to this in the fact that with this amount of instability now coming forward, it is very possible for the Saudis or for other players to try and capitalize on this instability to create division within the different communities inside Lebanon. So again, striking up that Sunni-Shia divide, alienating one community from another. And I think right now all of the political leaders in Lebanon are trying to ensure and work on this to make sure that this doesn't flare up again as we've seen in the past.
How easy is it to stoke unrest in Lebanon?
No, I think you don't have to worry about Lebanon. Lebanon is very unified from within. Everybody understands the challenges and the difficulty that we're facing today. I have to just address one thing. I think the Sunnah, they made very clear in their, especially the future bloc, they actually said they want the Prime Minister to come back to Lebanon. So it seemed this event brought everybody on board. I think the security of the country is under control now more than ever, but we have to be very careful. There always will be some terrorist activity could happen here and there. We know that these intelligence are capable of doing a lot of things. So there is fear of securities issue, but as far as stability of the country, the army, the internal security, every military authority in Lebanon are watching very carefully, and everybody is actually know the size of the threat, and everybody understand what it means to be unified. And I think we are very unified, more than any time I've seen before.
Beverley, do you share Kamel confidence?
To a certain extent. I mean, I think we have to remember that Lebanon has always been vulnerable to external interference, that in some sense it has been against its wishes, against the wishes of its population. It has often been a theatre of conflict, bloody violence and internecine war for other actors. And we've seen that with Syria, we've seen that with Israel, we've seen that with the French, we've seen that with Iran, we've seen that with Saudi Arabia. So I think where Kamel is right is that in terms of political resilience, clearly it's the case that the reaction has not been what Saudi Arabia or others who support Saudi Arabia may have anticipated. But in terms of security resilience, this does make Lebanon vulnerable, and it would be silly to think otherwise. And I think that's why, again, we see the reaction from certain European capitals and from the United States, because in terms of the international interest and the prosecution of wider security and strategic campaigns in the Middle East as they pertain to Syria and Iraq and the war against ISIS, that this does have an impact, and this is what I call the contagion effect that has been unleashed knowingly or unknowingly, if we accept perhaps that there's a degree of inexperience and ignorance and immaturity in certain foreign policy making circles in Riyadh.
Nor is this a situation that Lebanon can sort out on its own and should sort out on its own?
I don't think anything in Lebanon's history has ever been sorted out by Lebanon on its own. And I think that we would be incredibly naive and optimistic to assume that we can sort it out by ourselves as well. But I think that the calls by by members in the international community for Lebanon to try and deal with this, and the voices that are coming out from Lebanon in unison with the same message it's positive. But I think eventually, like, this is an issue that Saudi has with Iran, and this is an issue that will only be solved between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And unfortunately, as Beverley said, Lebanon has always been a battlefield for other forces.
So we're going to have to leave our discussion there for today. Kamel Wazne, Nour Samaha and Beverley Milton-Edwards, thank you all very much for joining us. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, that's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, Bye for now.